Mark Fernando.
Okay.
Okay.
Um, for the
So to the
objective,
objectives of the program, here's Mark Fernando.
um, first of all, we're very sorry on some technical issues, technical problems for before my speech. But however, it's good afternoon to all of you. Greetings of solidarity from Anakbayan, Metro Manila. We all know that the coronavirus itself is dangerous, but an even deadlier threat the Filipino people experience is how the Philippine government dealt with the COVID-19 outbreak in the country. The government imposed over Metro Manila the longest lockdown in the world, but cases only continue to increase from 52 when the lockdown started to 23,500 positive cases when lockdown ended on May 31. There were more arrests of quarantine violators than those who found to have contracted the disease. There was mass hunger and mass unemployment in place of mass screening or testing. Even as the lockdown ended, many fear the disease and many are more fearful of dying of hunger. Such situation is unlike many others in other parts of the world. It gives us despair, it makes us yearn for change. The pandemic amplified the many social ills and inequalities that have long been there, long suffered by the majority of people. But amid the dark and despair, hope shines through when we hear of how a small Latin American country fought its way through the pandemic. Small only in population and land size compared to others, even to the Philippines, but never small in its heart for humanity. Cuba has been known for its medical humanitarianism around the world since the victory of Cuban Revolution led by Fidel Castro amid US blockade, aggression, and economic sanctions. Its prioritization of healthcare system and other basic social services helped the country survive deadly disease, extending its help in virus countries hit the most. Join us and distinguished guest Cuban ambassador to discuss how Cuba fought COVID-19 at home and how internationalism, despite the 6 decades of US embargo that sought nation, groups and businesses to deny them help or provisions. Thank you. Pamanak Bayan, Metro Manila.
Thank you, Mark Fernando. I would also like to call Sham Osidilio, the lead convener of Kilusang Bayanihan, a people's movement calling for increased state subsidy and improved social services and full state responsibility amid the crisis brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic and the state-controlled lockdown. Osidilio, together with her group, Kilusang Bayanihan, has also called on the attention of the government to prioritize mass testing and not dwell on military solutions. Again, here is Sham Osidilio to share the Philippine experience with the COVID-19 pandemic and the Philippine response on the pandemic. Shama Sidilio.
Okay, thank you, Kyle, for the introduction. But before I give my presentation, can I please ask the admin to enable share screening? Thank you. So while I prepare my presentation, currently the Kilusang Bayanihan is a network of volunteers aimed to give donations and relief drives for currently the victims of the pandemic. And accordingly, I would like to present the views of Kilusang Bayanihan with regards to the current situation of the Philippines, almost a quarter of our year under lockdown. So can you see the screen? Is my presentation projected already? Okay, thank you very much. So adding to the details shared by Mark already, so our total positive individuals have reached up to, this is a joint data for the validated and unvalidated cases. We have 23,843 positive individuals. This is due to the backlogs made by the Department of Health, which up until now they are still trying to address, despite of the fact that funds have been disbursed, and it's already been 78 days since the lockdown started. So if we can see, based on the data, we are still not yet flattening the curve compared to what the Department of Health has been presenting over and over again. Apart from that, the data casts doubt on the people on the Filipinos, whether if we are really flattening the curve or not, which is why we deem that decisions made should be based on actual scientific data presented by the Department of Health, and having inaccuracies in the data affects how the government reacts and how the people sacrifice longer days and months of their lives without income, without jobs, and the likes. So apart from that, one of our major problems in the Philippines is that our COVID-19 response from the government is overpriced. Say, for example, we have purchased extraction equipments worth 4 million pesos, while the private institutions have purchased extraction equipments worth 1.75 million pesos only. So that's already a 3.25 million pesos discrepancy. Our testing by the PhilHealth, our COVID-19 testing by the PhilHealth is worth 8,150 pesos, while Red Cross, in Red Cross tests, it only costs 3,500 pesos. Our personal protective equipments for our frontliners, purchased by the Department of Health, by the government, is worth 1,800 pesos, while local manufacturers can produce the same PPEs at a lesser price. So, may pera sa pandemya, yung tinatawag natin. May pera sa pandemya dahil merong ilang taong kumikita sa likod nito. Pero what about the common people? May pera ba sila sa pandemya? So, under the Baho Law, or the Bayanihan to Heal as One Act, which gave Duterte the emergency powers, they've boasted that they have disbursed or given the people the biggest social amelioration program or dole out in the history of the Philippines, such as what is stated in my presentation. So our criticism with the social amelioration program are as follows. It is selective. No? Not all people were given, not all households were given, despite that all families were under lockdown. It is not enough compared to the daily family living wage needed by the families who needs more or less 1,004 pesos to survive every day. But when Kilusang Bayanihan computed the social amelioration program in Metro Manila in a month, it would seem that the daily subsistence or subsidy given by the government to the people of the Philippines or in Metro Manila is only 267 pesos a day. The SAP or the subsidies are very delayed. Beneficiaries have accepted or have received their SAP a month after the lockdown. And our beneficiaries, the Filipinos, are having had a hard time to access the social amelioration program because of bureaucratic processes imposed by the national government, when in fact, because it is a social amelioration program and it is an emergency subsidy, it should have been given right after, a day after the lockdown was declared. So in Metro Manila, we could see that in the comparison of data, we could say that there are almost 2 million pesos, or there are almost 2 million households in Metro Manila who didn't receive the first tranche of the social amelioration program. So they were excluded. Imagine 2 million households going hungry for more than 2 months already because the national government excluded these families from receiving it. So among the current struggles regarding the social amelioration program are as follows. The second tranche of SAP excludes 6 million households who are not under the enhanced community quarantine or modified ECQ. 5 million families not included in the first tranche are waitlisted for the second tranche. So it is already June 1 and the second tranche of the social amelioration program has not yet been distributed. And earlier, Malacanang announced that no more cash aids will be given by the government starting June. So apart from the problems with the social amelioration program and the overpriced, delayed mass testing, or there's no mass testing at all, given the explanation of Spock's Harry Roque, is the militarist lockdown and torture happening during the lockdown in the Philippines. As of April 19, there were 130,000 individuals arrested by the government, state forces, because of having quarantine violations, and were underwent various forms of torture. As reported, other victims were also killed. Say for example, the experience of the retired military who was gunned down by agents of the Philippine National Police. So when it comes to common people who are said to be accused of committing quarantine violations, there are some government officials who seem to be favored by the Duterte administration and are given free pass for the mañanitas, for the social gatherings, and the hospital and grocery runs of some government officials such as Sinas, Coco Pimentel, and of course, Mocha Uson. So apart from that, the people are currently struggling with the railroaded bills by the Congress, such as the ABS-CBN shutdown. We have the anti-terrorism bill, an extension of the Bayanihan law is seen. Charter change is being pushed by the DILG. The government is also pushing for lowering the income tax of big corporations and businesses. And on the other hand, more tax from the poor and the middle class will be imposed by Congress as a way to generate funds for the COVID-19 response and recovery of the Philippines. So with this, Kilusang Bayanihan reiterates our major calls, saying that we want to heal as one. We would like to pose a question, baka naman yung 1% lang ang mag-heal after this pandemic. So these are the calls of Kilusang Bayanihan. First, aid should be given to all Filipino families. In addition to the previously distributed SAP of the government. Second, lockdown bills should be waived. It's emergency lockdown bills incurred or stockpiled by the Filipino families. And of course, expedite the process of release of the social amelioration programs. Next, of course, our call for mass testing should be implemented by the government. And of course, strengthen the healthcare system of the Philippines. And with regards to the militarist lockdown, we would like to reiterate our call for respect for human rights. It is very essential to respect human rights in facing the pandemic, because if human rights are still violated, and then the people will still get anxious in dealing or recovering from the effects of the pandemic, because they're not only safe from, they will be not safe, not only from the pandemic, but also from harm from the national government. So actually, President Duterte has the chance to utilize an independent foreign policy or international solidarity in terms of dealing with the pandemic. Actually, he could have used his dealings with China to reach out to the government of Cuba and ask for help during the pandemic, since China and Cuba had such good relations with regards to the production of interferon alpha-2b. But Duterte didn't do that because, like I said, we would like to pose the question, maybe you're not healing as one, only the 1%. So with this, I would like to end my presentation with this very beautiful quote from internationally renowned writer, author, and the activist, Arundhati Roy, from her article at the Financial Times. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks, and dead ideas. our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So with that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Shami. Yeah, indeed, it's the pandemic which reveals the flaws of the system, the current system, which has been ineffective in dealing with the deadly coronavirus and other diseases which the humanity faced. Again, aside from the healthcare problem in the country, we also have a government which perpetuates violence against activists, against dissenters, against critics, and anyone they consider as hindrance to the fascist dictatorship of President Rodrigo Duterte. So we would also like to remind everyone that days ago, 2 days ago to be exact, an urban poor leader was abducted by unknown assailants, and 2 days before he was abducted by unknown assailants, a peasant leader also in northern Samar was gunned down by unknown assailants, but allegedly are considered as state perpetrators. So we are not moving any further. At this moment, where I'm going to call our next speaker. Our next speaker is Ambassador Ibet Hernandez Fernandez. Her Excellency Ibet Fernandez Hernandez is the Cuban ambassador to Malaysia, accredited on the 29th December 2015. She has a degree in political international relations in 1990. Her Excellency joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Cuba in 1995 at the Center of International Press, and her first posted job was in the Republic of Guinea in 1998. She has occupied different diplomatic ranks from third secretary in 1998 and mostly working off at African countries until assigned her recent post as ambassador extraordinary and plenipotentiary to Malaysia and not resident in the Philippines and Brunei. Her Excellency Ibet is well versed in English and French and other languages. So, not moving any further, I'm going to give the microphone to Cuban ambassador to the Philippines, Ibet Fernandez Hernandez, to discuss the Cuban international solidarity and the Cuban long history of giving solidarity in various countries to deal with deadly diseases. Ambassador.
Yes, good afternoon to all of you, to all the participants, and thank you very much for this opportunity to share information with you about Cuba. For me, it's always a pleasure when I have the opportunity to inform about what is happening in my country. And now that with the pandemic that we are living, I think it's important to share, because at the end of the day, only with cooperation we can fight, or we can struggle against this pandemic that it took everyone by surprise, and everyone was not really prepared to face something like this. And that's why I think that only through real cooperation we can get rid of this pandemic. Thank you very much also to Solidarity Association of Friendship with Cuba for facilitate this my participation in this forum. I'm going to talk only about Cuba experience, trying to inform about all the topics that you put in the title of the conference. I'm not going to go into politics, because every country has its experience, and I see that the more important now is to talk about what we can do together in health to overcome COVID pandemic. Okay, I think that it is important before going to a topic to speak a little bit about history. History is important. History is important because it allows us to go to settle us in the real context. For example, no me veo. For example, Cuba achieved independence. Can you see me? Can you see the screen?
Yes, yes. No. We're not seeing it, Ambassador.
You cannot see the screen?
Yes.
Really? Oh my. Wait. And the presentation either. Hello?
Hello?
Can you see the presentation or not?
No, we're not seeing it.
You can see the presentation.
You cannot see it.
No, we can see it.
Okay, let me try to get it because it was here in the screen, but now I cannot put it. No, share screen. Sorry.
KJ, I think you have to allow
Okay,
the screen of...
now you can see it.
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, now that's okay.
Okay, I was saying to you that always it's important to go into history before talking on any issue, on any country, because it's important to get the real context in which the situation has been developed. Cuba, for example, achieved independence in 1959 after 467 years of domination, first by Spain and then by US. During that period, both government structures subdue the majority of the population, ensuring that the well-being of the economically and politically privileged minority. It means that the majority of the population was living very poorly. There have been different landmarks in Cuban history that I brought to you as information. As I told you, Cuba was discovered in 1492, and in 1868, Cuba began his struggle for independence. There were 10 years in where the Cubans fight, and then they stopped till 1895. We call to that period the fertile truce, because it was the moment in which all the forces that were fighting for independence got together to organize themselves again. And then in 1895, we restart the wars of independence. Then 1898, when Cuba was about to win to Spain, US intervened. And from that period, it established a neocolonial phase till 1959, in which our revolution triumphed. It is important in between 1901 and 1959. There are two important actions that took place. One of them was the assault to the Moncada barracks. And after that, in 1956, was the Grand Mariage, who brought to Cuba the rebels that joined the people that were fighting in the country for get the independence. In that Grand Mariage, Fidel Castro came from Mexico with other people. In 1953, he has to go for exile because of the Moncada barracks. But this one important action, I want to point it out because it was in that moment when he established, if we can say, the platform of what Cuba will be after a revolution. That platform was established in his speech when he was defending himself, because Fidel was a lawyer, as you know, and there he said all the things that were going wrong in Cuba. So there were no health for anybody, there were no education for anybody, and he said, we need to change this situation. So all the bases and principles of our health system were established as of 1953. Okay, the revolution of 1959 implemented profound economic, political, and social transformations to reverse the power structure and creating a government of the people and for the people. Free education and health were among the first laws approved by the revolutionary government, as well as the agrarian reform that returned the land to Cuban peasants. One of the fundamental tasks of the revolution was the creation of a public health system to ensure the access for the entire population, which before 1959 was a privilege accessible only to those who could afford it. It means that people that has not money, they didn't receive any health care. So it was important for the people who brought the revolution to assure that everybody can have the same rights in terms of health and education. I just wanted to talk about that history because, as you see, our revolution it only has around 60 years, but in 60 years, the transformations and achievement that we have had have been huge in terms of allowing or giving all the rights to the people that contribute to have this revolution. Now I'm going into the principles of our Cuban health system. As I told you, it was the main task of the revolution in 1959. So they said that the Cuban health system has to be universal, free of charge, accessible to everybody, regionalized and comprehensive. And it has to be reachable for all citizens in the city and the countryside, people of any political affiliation, of any race or any sex, people that believe or not believe, that have a religious or not religious belief. So also that our health system have to be a component of cooperation with the countries abroad. Health practices will have to be under solid scientific basis. That's why a lot of money of our budget was, how can I say, was orientated to create scientifics that can do research, that can come out with medicines that will be necessary for the population. Everything has to be, how can I say, very well chained in order to assure that everybody has access to the health. Okay, how Cuba developed collaboration. You have to know that solidarity and internationalism are values that identify Cuba as a nation. Both have been present since our independence struggle, and their maximum expression was reached when the revolution triumphed in 1959. The principles of our foreign policy converge with a set of diplomatic, economic, and ideological cultural instruments. Amongst them emerged the cooperation in the field of health. What are the basic foundations of this medical cooperation that Cuba have give all along the years? Okay, collaboration constitutes an important axis of Cuban foreign policy as a way for true integration. It means integration among countries is important, and we can do it through collaboration. It is channeled through central and local governments and seeks to create or strengthen an infrastructure that allows its sustainability. It is developed based on the sum of potentialities between the countries involved, not for profit, taking into account existing differences and asymmetries. Health professionals and technicians who are primary dedicated to primary health care are sent to provide their services to the entire population without distinction of races, creeds, and ideologies, without mixing in matters of internal policy and respecting the laws and customs of the countries where they work. This one is very important because I don't know if you are aware that in the recent months, US have been talking very badly about Cuban cooperation, trying to discredit what Cuba have been doing all along the years. And they said that Cuba is sending armies to go to the countries to influence and to try to reverse whatever situation they have. And it's not true, because as you see, it's a principle not to mix into internal matters. We are going only to give, our doctors, goes only there to give health to their population. It's not true that they are going there with any political mindset. It's not. They are going there only for cooperation. Another of the principle of the foundations, it is that the cooperation follows the maximum of responding to the needs posed by the countries receiving the aid. Due to its institutional nature, it tries to benefit as many people as possible and develops in the most remote and delayed areas. It means that Cuban doctors are not going only to the urban side of their countries. They are going to those places where sometimes the local doctors doesn't want to go because it's in the rural areas. But Cuban doctors are prepared and ready to go there to give and to provide healthcare to the population living in the most remote areas of the country where they are serving. Well, our collaboration with other countries started in 1963. It was that year in which the first medical brigade was sent to Algeria. It has around 22 cooperants that went there to help the government after a request received. As you see, in 1963, there were only a few years after the Revolution Trump. And even our first University of Medicine was not complete, consolidate, but still it was important for us to give Algeria the aid that they were needed at the moment. It was the date where our collaboration started, 1963. The cooperation of Cuba, as you see, it has more than 57 years. In these 57 years of cooperation, we can identify two main phases. The first one between 1960 and 1998, where we developed international missions and emerging medical brigades in disaster situations and in the training of human resources abroad. It was free solidarity support prevailed this stage, despite the limitations imposed by the special period and the resurgence of blockade. It means that even though in the more difficult situations, Cuba never stopped of giving solidarity. And from years 2000 until today, that the training of human resources and the sending of medical brigade and the promotion of services of greater added value, such as technology transfer, to maintain increase the presence of the collaboration was maintained in Cuba, for Cuba to the world on compensated basis. It was not as before that we send the doctors there and Cuban government will pay for everything, and only the state that was receiving them has to pay allowance for food and give them accommodation. But the salary was paid by Cuba at the moment. Now, no. Now we need the government that we are sending doctors to pay certain amount of money of us, because it's the only way that our health system can continue developing and continue developing well, and also is the way that it allows us to continue giving more solidarity. There have been, I think that there have been three important milestones in the collaboration offered by Cuba, and all has to do with the advanced thinking that our late President our late President Fidel Castro had. Cuba trained resources not only for Cuba, but for the rest of the world. Cuba is ready to help whoever we need it. So on that basis, our cooperation reached the milestones that you can see in the screen, and I will explain to you a little bit. One of them, the first of them, was in 1998, the establishment of the Comprehensive Health Program. It was established following the hurricanes George and Mitch that affected a lot of Central American and Caribbean countries. And after that, this program was extended to Africa and the Pacific. The program represents a projection to the wealth of the Cuban public system. And also the possibility to expose us more to what the other countries needs. The other one that is related to the first one was the creation of the Latin American School of Medicine in 1999, that at the very beginning was conceived for training doctors for the countries that has going into the comprehensive health program in Central America and the Caribbean, but later extended to other countries, other areas in the world, to Pacific, to Africa. We, in that framework, we got some students from the Philippines that are already graduated as doctors in Cuba. The School of Medicine has graduated till the present to 29,000 doctors. And it is expected that at the end of the academic year 2020, 225 students from 62 countries graduated at the school, ascending the historical figure of 30,000 graduates from more than 100 countries in just 2 decades. I think it has been a good and a significant support to the other countries that are fighting, or they are trying to create their own health system. And the third one was the creation of the Henry Reeve contingent in 2005. This Henry Reeve contingent, it is specialized in disaster and medical relief. It was created to help, imagine, after so many years of blockade, that contingent was created to help the territories of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama that were severely affected by Hurricane Katrina. Do you remember Hurricane Katrina in 2005? You know that was very devastated. And Cuban government created that brigade, and they said, let's help America in this. But as usual, US government didn't accept the aid that Cuba was offering at the time. But nevertheless, the brigade continue, the contingent continue in place, and it served in that same year in Pakistan, where they were the earthquake, remember? And also in Guatemala, that was also affected by earthquake. The contingent, for your information, the contingent Henry Reeve was named after a US doctor that died in 19th century fighting for Cuban independence from Spanish colonial rule. As you see, and I told you, solidarity is a value of our nation, not only because we give solidarity, but also because Cuba has received solidarity in all the years of existence of Cuba as a nation. So this is one example of them, Henry Reef. The Henry Reef Brigade, as you see there, in the 70 World Health Assembly, they were awarded for the extraordinary contribution to the public health in the world. After they were awarded after they went to Africa to fight Ebola. Imagine Cuba was a country that didn't have any experience on it, but the World Health Organization requested Cuba help, and then we sent a brigade of 259 cooperants to fight Ebola in Africa. We can, after this, I think we can conclude that the collaboration of Cuba with other countries have been possible thanks to the development of its national health system. I think that both have grown up together. I want to show you now some statistics that can tell you how we have improved since 1959 till now. For example, in 1959, in Cuba, there were only 6,286 doctors. Most of them were located in the big cities and dedicated to private practice. At the triumph of the revolution, half of them went to US. So Cuba remained with only 3,000 doctors. At the moment, the infant mortality was bigger than 60 per 1,000 live births. Life expectancy was less than 60 years. And sanitary hygiene was dominated by communicable diseases, many of them preventable by vaccines. And there were only one single school of medicine. Can you imagine the situation we have in 1959 that people died only for parasites? Children in the countryside died for parasites because they didn't have any medicine, they didn't have any doctor that can see them. Pregnant women normally died when they were into labor because there were nobody there that can receive the baby. So in 2019, the situation was different. Cuba has 95,487 doctors. Remember, from 6,000, now we have 95,487, in which 13,000 of them are family physicians. It means those are the doctors that are in the primary health care. Those are the doctors that goes every day to the community to check the people and to see their health situation. We have covered 100% of the rural areas. Our infant mortality is 4 per 1,000 live births. Life expectancy reached 78.45 years. And it prevails immunization program that covers 13 diseases. It means that all children, when they are born, they started to be immunized through a program of vaccines that have been developed by Cuba. Among the 13, 8 have been developed by Cuba, and it covers 13 diseases. And we have at the moment 13 universities for medicine. In the past, we have only one in 1959. So that is the situation that we have, and I think it's an outstanding advantage in terms of what Cuba health system reached or achieved in those years of revolution. In 2019, this was the statistics of our collaboration. We were present in 65 countries with 29,000 cooperants, and 10,000 of them were doctors. since our beginning in Nigeria with only one brigade with 22 people. So in all the years, we have been present in 164 countries with more than 407,419 cooperants. Okay, let's go now into COVID-19. As I told you, COVID-19 was something unexpected for all countries. But in the case of Cuba, we started preparing and getting ready to face the disease even before it had reached to our country. The first case in our country was detected 23 of March, if I recall well, and it was imported cases to Italian tourists that went to one of our cities, and from there it started the spread of the disease on the country. Cuba, for the fighting of COVID-19, Cuba relies on its well-structured health system to deal with the COVID-19. This system have two essential pillars: prevention and work at the community level. Prevention is very important. Cuba cannot afford to have medicine to cure. It's better to prevent that the people go into to have a disease. Only prevention is the key weapon, is we can say so, to avoid or to control any health situation. Through the press, the government structures, political and social organizations, the country has set out to prevent the contagion. For this, family doctors and nurses, accompanied by volunteer social workers, visit the population in their homes to detect any suspicious case and contribute to health education. Based on the preventive approach of the Cuban health system, the government, together with the health authorities and the scientific community, designed the plan for confronting and controlling the disease based on the country experiences and conditions. In addition, tours and territorial meetings were held to train the entire first level of leadership in all around the country, and daily meetings on the wealth and country situation were instituted to evaluate the implementation of the corresponding measures. An important part of the conform plan was the study of experiences of the first countries affected by the pandemic and those that present that have a more critical situation, as well as international protocols. The plan was designed and adopted in pre-epidemic and epidemic stages, with measures according to the complexity of each one. An essential factor in the confrontation that Cuba has planted in the pandemic lies in the investigation by the communities. That one is very important, which have been described as active because its essence lies in going out to look for the cases. Instead, the people with the disease goes to the hospital. That makes the difference. So there were activists, if we can say so, that goes house by house, checking every day the people living, the people in their houses, to see how the temperature is, to see if they have any symptom of flu or something. So that has enabled us to control that the disease goes in a spiral that gets out of control. So people went to the houses to look for the cases, not the people sick went to the hospitals. Cuba accumulates at present 2,045 cases accumulated, and active we only have 151. We have recovered patients 1,809 recoveries, and 83 people has passed away. We have 414 patients that are admitted in hospitals for clinical epidemiological surveillance, and another 1,748 people have been monitored from their houses, from the primary health care. It means that they don't have to, they don't go to the hospital. They have been monitored by the doctor and the nurse of the family. They are in their houses to see if they develop any symptoms related to COVID. The country at the moment remains in the phase of limited indigenous transmission and in a favorable scenario, according to the predictions of the behavior of the disease. But the Cuban Minister of Health indicated that we cannot be confident of that. We have to continue controlling and checking every situation, every spot when will be possible the disease to appear. The support of the population in complying with the measures is essential. Without this, it's impossible to control the COVID. The Cuban scientific community also, they have been working with the doctors since the beginning. They have put all its efforts into the research for medical protocols and treatments that help to fight COVID. It was involved from the beginning in the fight against the disease, even before the first confirmed case were reported in Cuba. After a high-level biotechnology industry, which is only found in developed countries, Cuba allowed to face the pandemic with better conditions. It means it was something that we were together, doctors, scientific community, and the population. From the start of the spread of the new coronavirus in China, as you remember, and you mentioned also, interferon 2 alpha 2B started to be used. The one used in China was manufactured in one of the joint ventures that we have with that country through a transfer of technology. And the particular, the use of this one is not the only medicine that can contribute to improve the health of the patients suffering from COVID. But this particular interferon is not as aggressive as other interferons are, because this one is not only injectable, this one you can use it as a spray for your nose and also as drops. So the people that used this interferon, the rate of recovery have been very speedy and very good. Also, the Center for Molecular Immunology, one of the most prestigious Cuban scientific institutions, have been involved in studies of the new virus, even though it is recognized worldwide for research on cancer treatment. Research protocols are currently being developed with 3 Cuban products, one of which controls hyperinflammation in one of the phases of COVID that cause the most harm to patients. The other one is a drug that have been incorporated in the protocol, was previously used to treat anemia in patients with kidney failure, and that favors oxygenation. And the third protocol with a molecule will regenerate the damaged tissue in the lungs. We don't have the medicines that can cure COVID, but at least for prevention, for improving the quality of life of the patients that are suffering, to face better the disease, we have it. That's why our number of cases and recoveries have been almost fair, because the medicine that we have been used, the drugs, have been very effective because they contribute to increase the defense level of the bodies, or I mean the antibodies of the person that has the disease. In the joint effort of Cuban scientific institutions to confront COVID-19, the Immunosay Center managed to assemble a diagnostic system based on Suma technology to detect antibodies generated by the new coronavirus. Population studies with this technology will soon begin to carry it out in Cuba. which will allow the behavior of COVID to be diagnosed with greater precision in population groups that are not contacts or suspects and to avoid possible contagion. Cuba currently carried out 22 clinical studies and trials that are carried out to confront COVID-19. On the request, Cuba sent 22 brigades, Henry Reef, to the same number of countries for the fighting of COVID epidemic. We sent 4 to Africa, 3 to Europe, 14 in Latin America and Caribbean, and 1 in Middle East, which is Qatar. Last week, the brigades that were in Italy returned to Cuba, and we received, or our government received, the acknowledgement of the Italian authorities for the work that our cooperants developed there. It was a very particular moment because, as you see, Europe seems to be divided for the fighting of COVID, and Cuba was there, able to go and help. I show you now the map with the brigades that we sent abroad for the fighting of COVID. I think this is, yes, it is already updated, yes. We need to take out the Italy from there, but they were the brigades that went out to fight COVID, Henry Reef brigades. So that's how we help to fight COVID. In our case, as I told you, the brigades were on the country's local authorities' request. They were in 2 modalities. One, to advise the local authorities how to deal with the virus, but the other one was the cooperants in the field together with the local doctors to fight the disease. Now we're going to blockade. As you know, and you mentioned too, Cuba has lived under blockade for almost 60 years since the Revolution Trump. And US government, only because US government never accepted that a small country where it has the ambition to dominate since the 18th century has made a revolution in front of its nose. For them have been very difficult to accept that. And that's why blockade continued. Blockade was officially imposed on February 3, 1962, and along the years has caused financial losses of $4,343.6 million, which is a lot. Under the Donald Trump administration, the climate of hostility in bilateral relations have been strongly marked by increased aggressive of US rhetoric against Cuba. The blockade constitutes a massive, flagrant, and systematic violations of the human rights of all Cubans. Due to their declared purpose and the political, legal, and administrative scaffolding in which they are based, these sanctions qualified as an act of genocide under the 1948 Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide as an act of economic war, as established in the 1909 London Naval Conference. Since the beginning of the application of the blockade against Cuba, the health and food sectors have been prioritized, targets for attacks by US governments, because they thought that with the blockade, Cuban government, revolutionary government, will fall down in 3 months. But it has been already 60 years, but they don't learn the lesson, unfortunately. There is not Cuban family or sector in the country that have not been a victim of the effects of the blockade. More than 77% of the Cuban population have been born and raised under the economic fence imposed by Washington. the US have ignored with arrogance and contempt the 28 resolutions adopted by UN General Assembly condemning the blockade and the many and varied voices that inside and outside the country have called for the cessation of the unjust blockade. And that's why I'm very, Cuba, many people said, why you don't stop to present that resolution that at the end of the day is not compulsory and US continue imposing the blockades. Can you imagine if Cuba doesn't denounce the fact that is blockade imposed? How can people be aware of the situation that we have? How can people pronounce in words and in actions against the blockade? For us, it's important to continue denouncing and to continue presenting the resolution because it's a way to create awareness of the situation that Cuba is having. That's why I'm very happy that I'm very grateful that you have bring a petition to sign against the blockade because it will be more voices against this unjust and illegal policy that is affecting the Cuban country and at the end of the day prevent Cuba to have more cooperation or to develop its economy. What affects the most Cuba in terms of blockade is the extraterritorial scope that the blockade has, as it prevents that Cuba maintain normal trade relations with other countries. Why? Because US blockade laws can punish or can fine countries that dare to have economic trade, that have trade with Cuba. It doesn't have been completely, how can I say, harmful to all the countries because we still have trade relations with many, but sometimes it's very difficult to get access to banks, get access to things of first necessity. For example, in health, there are people suffering for cancer, and even though we produce some drugs for cancer, there are others that we don't produce and we need to buy outside. And many of the time, we cannot buy it just because the big pharmaceuticals are not allowed to sell it to Cuba. So people may die just because blockade are preventing them to sell it to my country. The strengthening and the extraterritorial application of the system of sanctions against Cuba was reflected in content damages to Cuban companies, banks, and embassies, which face colossal obstacles in their commercial and financial activities in many countries in the world. At the current juncture, the US insists in maintaining the blockade against Cuba and also discredit the humanitarian work carried out by the Cuban doctors around the world to help to eradicate the pandemic. US has even advised governments that have requested Cuban assistance to renounce to it, and yet we have not seen an active solidarity coming from the US for the United States as required by the pandemic and as being the first economy in the world. US has not responded in the way they are powerful. They have not given any show of solidarity, even though they say they are helping this country or this country. At the end of the day, it's not a substantial thing with what they are able to do, unfortunately. Unquestionable, in the middle of the blockade, it becomes cumbersome for the purchase of the necessary materials to fight COVID. There are nearby markets that Cuba has not accessed due to the unilateral measures posed by blockades. And sometimes when we agree at the time of purchasing the products, we receive a negative response from the transport doesn't appear to move it. Some weeks ago, at the beginning of the pandemic, Jack Ma, the president of Alibaba Group, sent a donation to Cuba. Well, he wanted to send a donation to Cuba, but the donation couldn't reach because the transport company that he hired to bring the supplies, said that they cannot do it because they should be punished by US. So US doesn't give help, but doesn't allow others to give help to Cuba. Nevertheless, Cuba continues its efforts to seek the necessary resources to treat the pandemic where they exist. However distant it can be distant. The objective is to guarantee the resources for the present stage, although the prices of these products have risen due to their high demand, to which is added for Cuba the cost of the obstacles caused by the blockade. Given the globalized threat we face, the security of the world depends on international humanitarian containment. A humanitarian-based US foreign policy is the only approach that will win the war against this essential enemy. I would like to conclude by a quote of President Miguel Díaz-Canel regarding the solidarity of Cuba, but it is very valuable today. We share such tremendous challenges that only together and cooperating, we can face them successfully. It was said by our president in 2018. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm ready now for the questions that you may have, if there is one. Thank you so much.
Ambassador, for a question, I just want to clarify: is Cuba prepared for this kind of pandemic? And if yes, why and how? And how do the free education, free healthcare, biomed technology advances, and other progressive things such as nationalized industries and agriculture link up or work together to help Cuba prepare for this pandemic?
Can you repeat?
Is Cuba prepared for this kind of pandemic? And how do you think free education, free healthcare, Cuba's national industries, and develop agriculture link up together to work or to help Cuba prepare for this kind of pandemic?
Yes, Cuba, as I tried to explain to you, Cuba was prepared to face the pandemic even before we detected the first case. Because as it is a pandemic, we were sure that it will arrive to our shores in any of the moment. Cuban economy, as you know, is not big or strong, given all the issues that we have with the blockade. But what has to do with the organization of the government to face a situation was already there. The government, together with the biotech industry, together with the doctor, they prepare a strategy how Cuba can face this situation. Even though we have to shut down the country, people have to work from home, people have to continue buying things, going out to buy things. So everything was organized even before the disease arrived. But we have seen after more than 60 days of the COVID presence in Cuba, how effectively we have faced it and we have struggling. Sometimes, as I told you, there have been needs of different raw materials, if we can say so, to prepare some of our medicines, or we need to have gloves, but we cannot buy it abroad because they cannot be sent to Cuba. So those are situations that we have to manage. But Cuban people is very optimistic. We don't have those these masks that we are using here in Southeast Asia or in the rest of the world. But do you think that it was something that stopped Cuban people of continue living? No, no, no. Cuban people started to prepare their own masks. from fabric, and they went out with their mask without stopping because they didn't have the nice one or the one that coming from a plant. We continue living because at the end of the day, we need to survive, and it's what we have been taught all those years. We need to face the situation with the resources that we have, and of course, the solidarity that we have received. I cannot say that none of the supplies hasn't arrived to Cuba. There have been many. There have been 3 shipments from China that went to Cuba. There have been many countries that have been offering their help. South Africa, for example, in the same plane that came to pick up the doctors that went there, they sent a lot of supplies to Cuba for the doctors. Vietnam sent rice to Cuba for the frontaliers. There have been many gestures, but at the end of the day, it's a way to cooperate and to collaborate together to face the pandemic, because maybe Cuba cannot give them, I don't know, mask or something, but can give them doctors and can give them medicine. It's the way we have to cooperate.
Any questions from the audience? Ambassador, speaking of Cuba's efforts to contain the COVID-19 or the coronavirus, may I know how did Cuba ensure providing basic necessities of families affected by social isolation, such as the use of libretto? Can you share a libretto? Yeah. Can you also share about it, or enlighten us about that support from the Cuban government?
Yes, the Cuban government has assured or secure that non-families will be out of any of the product of main need that they need. They have been different in different communities. There have been commercial posts that have been set temporarily to allow the people to go there and buy. There have been things that have been on the ration. I mean, you cannot go and buy 2 or 3 chickens, for example, but at least there will be 1 chicken from each family. It is something that is secure for each family to reach the food, the basic needs, materials. It has been assured by the state in each of the communities, because sometimes they have been sometimes at the beginning there were kind of no chaos, but those posts, they were not in place. So people wanted to buy something and they went out of their community long distances, and they didn't have the real perception of danger of the virus. So people went to queue to buy things, and the state said, no, we cannot afford to have this because there will be more people infected. We need to move the products to their community. So people go only there, and it's very easy to control. There have not been anybody without food during those days. Nobody have been left behind by the government.
Ambassador, speaking of the resources that Cuba used in order to fight the virus or to provide basic social services for the Cuban people, I would just like to clarify how Cuba was able to achieve this despite the small country and limited natural resources, and despite the 60 years of embargo by the U.S. or the economic sanctions by the U.S. Because the all Philippine administrations have been dependent on the US, but the country remains backward in medicine, science, and technology. So can you share us about that, about how Cuba was able to achieve this despite being a small country?
Well, I think that all the achievement that we have had have been obtained thanks to political will. which is important. As I told you, at the beginning of the revolution, there were a lot of people dying because they didn't have access to health, they didn't have access to education. And Cuba has to manage, after the revolution, to create their own systems in which everything will be a complement. Healthcare, biotechnology, everything going to a point, and on the very organized basis, because there cannot be development of a country if your people are not healthy, if your people are not able to satisfy their main needs. It has been difficult, of course, because being a blockade country means what I told you, that we cannot have normal trade relations with other countries because of the sanctions that have an extraterritorial scope. But the organization of the government and the, how can I say, the unity of the people have been able to put us in the place we are now. Because it's a matter of surviving. We cannot just rely on the problem that Cuba is blockade and there is nothing we can do. There are many things we can do. That's why we develop biotechnology, to put in a lot of budget to develop sciences. Because if we don't develop our science, how can we import from abroad if we cannot trade with other countries? You see? So we have to organize all those things little by little. It have been more than 60 years already, but everything have been coming little by little on organized base, on political will, on a conjunction of all the factors to survive all the constraints that we have. Without this, it has been impossible. You may have a very good government, but if the people don't follow it, there is nothing you can do, and vice versa. It's more or less the same. Is complemented. Cuba has put money, a lot of money, in education and in health. That's why we are able to have now a biotech industry from first world.
Ambassador, you have said that Cuba has been focusing on basic social services such as education, health, etc. I would just like to ask this: have you heard of Duterte's President Rodrigo Duterte's, the Philippine president, his reliance on the private sector in the bid to fight the COVID-19 pandemic? What can you say about this move? His reliance on private sector instead of using the public funds for basic social services, because in the past days, Duterte has been President Rodrigo Duterte has been announcing that the government will rely on private sector when it comes to mass testing or the testing of individuals, and it has also said that the government subsidy for poor families will be stopped now that we are now under the general community quarantine. So what can you say about these moves, adding that Duterte has also been relying to police brutality and military solutions to contain the pandemic?
I'm not here to criticize or to give any comments on that. As I told you, I will speak on Cuba experience, that it have been different from the Philippines ones. Cuba, at the beginning of the revolution, nationalized all the companies that has to do with US, that were the one who control country. And all the private property was in a way, how can I say, erased. We didn't have private property because it was a government of the people and for the people. It's experience that we have, and all those properties that were nationalized were given to the people for the people to develop it. And now with the updating of our economic model, we have acknowledged the, how can I say, the importance of having private property in some areas or sectors that can contribute to the economy. I put you an example. Now, in front of COVID, we have the doctors working to find protocols to help the people. But we have community restaurants, for example, on the private property. Those people are contributing with government efforts to deliver to the people. How? They give food for free to them. They go house to house for the people that are old, that they have nobody to take care of them, as a social service. You see, they go and they give what they have. It's a matter of cooperation even among us, because it's the way they have to help. At the end of the day, what we want is to help that everybody will be as well as possible amid this COVID pandemic. And also because all country has different situations. It's not the same here or there. And we are nobody to come and say, you have to do this or you have to do that. You can look at the experience that other has, but adopted or not, it's not compulsory, you see.
Okay. I think we have a question from the audience from
Yes.
De La Salle University, a student from De La Salle University.
Uh-huh.
You can turn on your microphone for question.
Hi, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
First and foremost, I'd really like to say that what is Cuba doing for COVID is really amazing. Other countries are really, diplomatic students are really amazed, but how Cuba is responding and how is Cuba being able, being a diplomatic country to help those countries who are COVID stricken. But my question is, how is the Cuban government able to balance the ratio between Cuban doctors to send to other countries and Cuban doctors to stay and help its own country?
To balance what?
The
Sorry?
ratio between Cuban doctors to send to other countries and Cuban doctors to stay and help their own country.
You mean the amount of doctors in outside?
Yes.
Well, as I tell in my presentation, at the beginning of the revolution, there were only 6,000 doctors. And when the exodus, when Cuba started to nationalize private properties, there were 3,000 that went. So we remain with only 3,000. But already in 1962, the first school of medicine was already in place to graduate new doctors. It means that from 1967, the first graduation of Cuban doctors started uninterruptedly. It continued graduating students and students and students. And that's why at the moment we have 9,000 hundreds doctors. And our ratio by population is 7.7. And we are able to have a primary health care orientation to take care of the population in their communities they have. If we send doctors, we send doctors abroad.
Yes.
It's true. For internationalism, for collaboration, but they won't be sent if the health of our own population is not assured. But we can do it because we have a lot of doctors. We can send doctors abroad and we can have covered all the services inside, not only with general practitioners or general doctors, but also with different specialties of them in each of the region, of the municipalities. Because our system, as I told you, starts in primary health care at the neighborhood. They are going into the polyclinic at the municipality, then they are going to provincial in the hospitals, and then they are going national to the National Institute for any of the diseases. And in each of the level, we have a specialist that can deal with the diseases that the population has. For example, if I'm suffering for blood pressure or or I'm pregnant and I need to be followed, I don't have to go to Havana to see a doctor because I have my own gynecologist working in my neighborhood that come to see me every day. That's what we have. And it won't be able for us to cover this if we send all of them abroad. We have some abroad, some inside, and that's the way. But the more important how we deal with it is because we have managed to train a lot of doctors in different specialties. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Most welcome.
Kyle, kindly turn on your mic.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Ambassador, I would just like to clarify, or can you please enlighten us about the Henry Reeves Medical Brigade that in its role or mandate has fought to ensure people of the world get better healthcare, and what more help can or does Cuba look to extend to other countries?
Hello?
Yes.
Well, our collaboration have been not only in health sector, have been also in training and education. As I told you, the Latin American School of Medicine was created in 1999, but also we have a school for sports that is not in place anymore, but in different careers in order to help other countries to train their human resources. In the case of the doctors, Henry Reeve. Henry Reeve was a contingent that was created in 2005 for a specific reason. It was to help. It was something that was created out of a specialist in different in different issues to help the population of US that was suffering for Katrina hurricane. It was on the very solidarian basis, but Bush government didn't accept it. But we didn't eliminate the brigade. We have it there because they are trained to face disaster situations and medical emergencies. That's why I have been able to send it to Indonesia, to Pakistan, to Guatemala, to Haiti, to different countries in the world when there is Africa, for example, Liberia, Guinea, that was suffering for Ebola. Whenever there is a situation of emergency, that brigade is there. We don't send it because we want it. The world knows that Cuba has well-trained people for this kind of things, and they requested, of course, and it's the way they go. They are highly trained specialists, and that's why they have been able to go. The brigade is not only composed by doctors, but also by nurses with high ranking development that join the doctors and other specialists and go abroad. The other doctors, they are normal, for example, other kind of collaboration is also medical, but they are working on regular basis on a country in which Cuba has signed an agreement to receive that kind of collaboration. They are specialists in different things, or mainly general doctors to serve the rural communities, as I told you, because most of the time, the local doctors doesn't want to go to the places that are remote, and Cubans are ready to cover those places.
citing the efforts of Cuban people for to contain or to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, how important is it for Cuba and Cuba's efforts to help other countries for the U.S. embargo to be lifted? What good could happen if the U.S. embargo is lifted amid the pandemic?
Well, if US, there have been a lot of calls to US to lift embargo, and mainly in the situation of COVID pandemic that we are having. Unfortunately, they have not listened to it, and blockade is something that is not conditional. We have done anything to US, and the more first things to do is to lift it without any condition, because at the end of the day, it's the people, the one who are suffering. As I told you, 7% of our population have lived under the blockade. Blockade should have been lifted. With blockade, we cannot develop our economy in the way we want, because maybe we have a lot of capacities in biotech, for example, and we can create a lot of things, but if we don't have access to funds from international organizations, if we don't have access to raw materials, we cannot do more. We have to do with the limited resources that we have. But as I told you also before, it doesn't stop us to continue living or working. We need to do it. We cannot just stop and say, let's blockade to pass. If we have done that, Cuba wasn't exist to date.
Okay. Ambassador, do you have any message for the Filipino people amid the pandemic? Or I think, what are your prospects for in this fight against COVID-19?
Well, COVID-19 is far from finished. And it's important to take measures just to avoid getting the disease. It's important to continue cooperating at the level of governments in terms of experiences, in terms of exchange of materials, in terms of prevention, because in the way you prevent, more people will be safe. It's something that we have to continue. We cannot stop until a vaccine has arrived. And even when the vaccine arrives, we don't know if all of us will have access to it. So we need to continue working in our countries for our life, for our development. Please stay safe. Don't overlook the danger that the disease imposes, because they may have been people that are asymptomatic and you don't know, and then the disease spread. The more, how can I say, important work that you can do in order to avoid the disease is to take care of yourself, is to take care of your family, to avoid going to crowded places, and to prevent, I think, is the more important. I just wanted to mention something that I forgot during my explanation on blockade. As I mentioned, the rhetoric of the US government under President Trump has endured. Today, there is a statement from our Ministry of Foreign Affairs relating the inclusion of Cuba in the list of countries that are not helping to fight terrorism. Cuba has been victim of terrorism for so many years, and so many people have died because of the actions that have been brought from US territory to our country. And how can they come and say that Cuba is not helping them? They are based only on how can I say, statements from Colombian government that is saying that Cuba didn't comply with the protocol of the peace negotiations that we have. Remember that Cuba was a guaranteed part of the peace of Colombia, and government of Colombia is asking us to send back people that are protected by the protocol. So US, because of that, put Cuba in a list of people that are not fighting terrorism. But before that, or even that. Last 30 April, Cuba embassy in US was attacked by someone that was ready to kill whoever was abroad. And since that moment, we have asked US government for a response to what happened, and they remain silent. If they remain silent, it means that they are how can I say, they are supporting terrorism. And because they haven't pronounced itself on that attack on our embassy, there have been many threats to our embassies abroad, which it was explaining today by my ministry. Many embassies abroad that they are saying that they will danger diplomats and the embassies in Mexico, in Costa Rica, Antigua y Barbuda, Canada, Cyprus, Austria, and Angola. Can you imagine? All those countries of our embassies in those countries has received threatenings from terrorists that they said that they want to do attack. How can a government that sponsors terrorism can say that Cuba is not cooperating with it? This is something that I wanted to know, because this one appeared today in our media and will be circulating all around. We still are asking US for response on the attack on our embassy, please, just to condemn it, because it have been caused a lot of death. But unfortunately, it was at night, and there were people that were already sleeping. But it's a danger that situation with this, amid this pandemic, are happening around the world. Just want you to know that. Thank you so much.
Ambassador, last question before we move to the talk of Kalabog. Can you describe in one word what is new normal for you after this pandemic? In one word only, yes.
New normal, internet.
Internet. Okay, now that we
Yes,
are having a
at the end
webinar.
of the day, we will have to be communicating through this. We cannot go out for meetings. We cannot. We can just have virtual meetings, virtual dancing, virtual concerts. So we need to prepare and to be ready, not to meet for a while, at least in person, and for continue taking care of us. Is it possible if we have a picture together of the participants?
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. Again, thank you for your for sharing your experience, the Cuban experience on the COVID-19 pandemic and the prospects after this. So now let's move to the talk of Ka Elmer Labog. So to give context, on March 24, the U.S. motive, the U.S. State Department tweeted that the Cuban motive was to make up the money it lost when countries stopped participating in the abusive program or the medical support of Cuba. Medical programs under which Cuban personnel are contracted by host governments to provide healthcare that is free at the point of delivery to poor and underserved population overseas, reaping the benefits of socialist state investments in education and health. Cuban medical exports have emerged in the context of a punitive and extraterritorial 60-year U.S. blockade that prevents Cuba from pursuing normal international trade. The contracts provide revenue to the Cuban state as well as higher salaries to participants. And under the pressure from the Trump administration, Brazil, Ecuador, and Bolivia have ended contracts in order to eliminate a vital source of revenues for Cuba, leaving millions of people without health care. The strategy of sabotaging Cuban medical exports originates in the Bush-era medical parole program, which encouraged Cubans to abandon missions in return for U.S. citizenship and was not ended by Obama until his final days in 2017. So now, to give us a context on the U.S. blockade and what more things can we do to stop this imperialist aggression, I'm giving the microphone to Ka Elmer Labog of La Solidaridad International and the current Secretary General of Kilusang Mayo Uno. Ka Elmer.
Thank you very much, team. Kyle, warm greetings to the participants in this anti-imperialist webinar, and warm greetings to Ambassador Ibete Fernandez for guesting in this webinar. Well, I am really amazed with the Cuban health system, especially with the states that they are helping a lot of countries underdeveloped, and even those who are supposed to have advanced in the field of medicine. It has pioneered in really helping a lot of countries, especially the developing countries, in fighting COVID-19 and other diseases, present and past. I'm really very amazed with the concepts of the Cuban healthcare system, where the integration of various factors such as the universal characteristic, the free and accessible health system, regionalized dispersal of the health programs of Cuba, and the comprehensibility of its program has been really a service to its citizens as well as of mankind. It has conducted the solid scientific studies in order to come up with the current condition of the Cuban health system at present, where they have attained the collaboration with various countries to develop their existing health practices. So it is not a matter of differences, or it's a consideration of the differences and asymmetries of various countries that has been pushing the Cuban health system in the international level. So when you say collaboration, clearly it has stated that it's an integration with the people and a government-to-government exchange, and not an exchange for profit. So it's not for political and the profit sense, but purely on the medicinal aspect that the Cuban health system is being developed. I am amazed with the principle where Cuban doctors will go to other countries to help, would really penetrate the areas where even the local doctors would, where the difficulties are much greater, where even local doctors of the host country wouldn't dare to go. The Cuban doctors would always be there. So it's not a comfort zone. So why is it that the ambassador started with relating to history? Indeed, it was the historical presentation has its very significance. Obviously, the Cuban people have undergone a lot of revolutions, and they have successfully triumphed in their revolution after the Moncada attack and the return of the Grand Mayat, and finally in 1959, after their triumph, they have actually come up with a comprehensive Cuban health system where the Cuban people are the main beneficiaries. Though this is entirely the opposite in our country, where if at the start they have the principle of prevention is better than cure, where they would go to the communities to really ascertain who are those who had who've been afflicted with these sicknesses. Then it is a matter of containing this contagion and to avoid people reaching the hospitals. In the Philippines, the hospitals come first before the masses are being served, as we are demanding mass testing system, the implementation of mass testing for the coronavirus. This is not really freely being provided by government, but instead they give this assignments to the employers to do the testing to their employees. What makes things worse is the latest pronouncements of the Department of Health that it is not a requirement for workers to undergo testing before they could really perform their jobs in various companies. Also, one announcement of the health department in the Philippines is to say that the asymptomatic people or individuals would not really be affecting other people. And this is a very dangerous proposition from people who should really take care of the health conditions of people in the Philippines. So in the case of Cuba, uh, uh, the attention on health and education, as well as to bring in people to have a medical doctorate in Cuba is an ongoing thing. I've been a beneficiary of the Cuban health system in 2014, where I had my broken ankle checked there, and it was really a very good health system where I've been treated well, as well as there are several doctors in the hospital who really would comprehensively take care of everything, even if the problem I really did have at the time is the problem about a broken ankle. So obviously, the health system in Cuba is a service to the people. So as of now, the neoliberal impositions are still in place in the Philippines and many countries. That is perhaps the reason, and I believe so, that they would not just entertain the proposals of medicines from countries like Cuba and even like the Philippines, where they have developed the interferon 2B. And in the Philippines, I think I would endorse the drug that's being developed by Dr. Fabunan, which they call the Fabunan vaccine. I think the reason why they wouldn't really entertain such recommendations is that because they would have to wait the signal of the big pharmas. Otherwise, if you produce medicines or antidotes that would be cheaper and more available and affordable, I believe it would pose a contrary position to those that are being proposed medically by big pharmas who have been in control of the health system of many countries today. So I think this is one battle against imperialism that we are doing now to assert our right to form our own health system. But just as Ambassador Yvette Fernandez has presented, without really undergoing a genuine change through triumph of our movement, then there would be no real health system that would exist, because it will always be dominated by the position of neoliberal policies of liberalization, privatization, and the regulation of the whole economy of the Philippines and the world economy. And so it's still an imperialist imposition on all fields. And that is why, in ending, I wish to solicit the support of the Cuban people in the struggle that we are also doing in the Philippines, especially your experience of being a part of the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. Perhaps you can assist us on this. And I wish to inform you that the friendship organization between the Philippines and the Latin American countries, La Solidaridad, is initiating an online petition to oppose the imposition of the United States over countries like Cuba, Venezuela, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and others. And so I'd like to invite various groups to join us in signing such a petition against the impositions of the U.S. and other imperialist countries against Cuba, Venezuela, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and other countries. So I think that is all. We have to maintain, especially at this very point where we are still struggling against the COVID, which many quarters would say is a man-made monster, and we still have to struggle against this. And from here on, we have to assert genuine change in our societies, a system and a change that really serves the interests of its own people. So we need this very change even in the Philippines, as well as in many countries worldwide. So in that aspect, I'd like to say that we must continue to develop international solidarity to defeat the imperialist, neoliberal impositions in the struggling countries of the world. Mabuhay and long live international solidarity.
Okay, before we proceed to the last remarks of Vincent from League of Filipino Students Metro Manila, Ambassador, are you still there? I would just like to have some special question, a question from our partner organization. Ambassador?
I'm here.
Yeah. Can you tell us about the nomination of Cuba in the Nobel Peace Prize? The nomination of Cuba, which was initiated by Italy and other countries as well.
Well, yes, I have information that there have been many countries that have support that the medical brigade Henry Reeve get the Nobel Prize, given the help that they have provided all around the world because of COVID. It will be good if they receive it, because at the end of the day will be another acknowledgement, but the more important acknowledgement that they can have is the one of the people that they save. It's not so important sometimes to have a lot of recognition if you are doing what you are said to do. And I'm sure that for them, just comply with their duty to save life is the more important thing they can have. I think it's a gesture of the Italians that at some point they felt that nobody cares about them. And then a country like Cuba, small but solidarian, came on their help. And also because they have been, during this pandemic, there have been many different shows of egoism and solidarity. If you remember, at the beginning of the pandemic in Cuba in March, there were a cruise ship that was trying to reach any of the coast in the Caribbean because they have patients with COVID-19. And not a country in there allows them to dock, not even US. And it was for for people from UK, and only Cuba allowed them to go there. And from them, there were people that didn't know about Cuba, but to receive that kind of help in very difficult moments, they were so overwhelmed and happy that they just also started a petition there in order to support the end of the blockade to Cuba. And those are the scenes and the actions that are important, the lessons that we have to take from this pandemic. So I'm not amazed. There will be other countries that want that will support that Cuban doctors have the Nobel Prize. I repeat, it's good, but they are happy because they help and they help well. Is what I can say.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador, for that. Okay, by this time, I'm giving the microphone to Vincent Impas Maligaya of League of Filipino Students, UP Manila, to close the program. And before our photo op.
Hello. So this webinar successfully discussed how Cuba effectively contained the COVID-19 pandemic in a very commendable manner. They did this using with an emphasis on their primary healthcare system and also medical internationalism that is that shines that gives hope to everyone because this embargo has been very difficult for the Cuban people, but they still persevered to give their people uh, the right interventions, uh, the right uh, response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Unlike here in the Philippines, where it is a militarized response, uh, there are uh, backlogs in data, and there are people dying from fascism, and as well as unnecessary deaths because of the economic toll that this lockdown has given to us. The U.S. blockade is a very we should unite to end that U.S. blockade because it has uh, given a lot of people, it has given the Cuban people suffering for more than 6 decades. So uh, we, I call on everyone to sign the petition and also unite so that the Cuban blockade, the U.S. blockade on Cuba would be lifted. Ayun, okay na. Hello. Photo ops na. Hello.
Everyone, please turn on your video so that we can have a photo opportunity with Ambassador. You can now turn on your video. Ambassador, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. I'm gonna get my call, wait. Ay, tama.
May nag-ano ba? TikTok.
Okay,
May nag-photo na ba?
Okay.
one,
Wow.
two,
Sige.
1, 2, 3.
Sorry.